We are gathering around the table today with Russ, and as Catholics, we journey through Lent for 40 days with Jesus in the desert, but as Catholics, we celebrate Easter for 50 days. One of my priests started a homily a few years ago by saying, as the deacon was proclaiming the gospel, I was just thinking how great it is to being Catholic. The world says Easter's one day, the church says, no, we're going to turn one day into 8 days. But today we're talking about the Shroud of Turin. But before we begin, yeah, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Russ Breault, and I'm a lifelong lecturer and researcher on the Shroud. I've been involved in this for over 40 years and written 3 books, probably presented to audiences maybe over 1,000 times. So, yeah, it's a wonderful subject and goes to the bullseye of the Christian faith: life,
Mm.
suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Amen. And I want to know where you're from because in Chicago we have deep dish pizza and Chicago style hot dogs. But what food is your city or state known for?
Well, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and so we're
Peaches.
famous for Southern food. Probably the one you see on a menu it would be shrimp and grits. Very Southern meal and quite excellent too, I might add.
Yeah, it's not peaches. I'm surprised. Isn't Georgia known for peaches?
Well, it's called the Peach State, but you'd be surprised. Actually, blueberries is probably our biggest agricultural crop.
Really?
Somewhere in there is peanuts and peaches. It's actually, yeah, it's very strange how that happened. If you go into Atlanta, there's 55 streets with the name Peachtree on it, but you'd be hard pressed to find a peach tree.
That's crazy. Let's talk about the Shroud of Turin. What is it for those who don't know?
Well, it's a 14-foot long linen cloth. It's only 3.5 feet wide, so it's long and narrow.
Hmm.
And it's made out of flax, a very durable linen material. It bears the faint front and back image of a bearded crucified man. And for hundreds of years, people have been making pilgrimages to Turin. It's been in Turin since 1578, and prior to that, it was in France, and prior to that, it was in parts of Turkey, and so, but it purports to be the actual burial shroud that wrapped Jesus when he was in the tomb. And so not only do you have an inexplicable image of about a 5'10" bearded crucified man, but you also have a whole pattern of bloodstains that correlate with the wounds of crucifixion, and not just any crucifixion, but specifically what the injuries sustained by Jesus, as recorded in all 4 gospel accounts. So um, the challenge of the shroud is that when it was first photographed in 1898, that's when it was discovered that for some reason the shroud looks a whole lot clearer, much more lifelike in a photo negative. Now I know we don't use negatives anymore. We're in the digital age, but back in the day, that was a big discovery. Why? When you reverse the image, when you reverse all your light values, why does the image look so much clearer? And so this was a mystery that launched the shroud, unlike any other relic. It launched the shroud into the realm of scientific investigation. Nothing has been investigated the way the shroud has. And it first got the interest of a lot of medical experts that wanted to ask this question: could this be the image of a man of a real human being who died from these wounds? And the resounding answer from all of the forensic pathologists that have studied it is that, yeah, it appears to be the image of a real human being who died from these wounds. So, once you move beyond the medical part of it, then you move into the investigation of the image itself, because you have a whole pattern of blood stains, and that certainly tells one story. But you have this inexplicable image, and what I mean by that is that the image on the cloth is of the man is very faint. It's not easy to see. And so so in 1978, you had a whole team of 33 American scientists go to Turin, Italy. They have this unprecedented access to the cloth for 5 days and nights, continuously, 120 hours around the clock. They bring with them all this gear. In fact, it was over 70 crates of gear weighing over 10 tons. X-radiography, infrared thermography, photomicroscopy, spectroscopy, all this stuff that they're going to do. And they're trying to come up with the answer to one question. What is the cause of this image? And you have this either or proposition that is really important. And that's this. Either the shroud is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, or it's not. And if it's not, well, then what is it? If it's not authentic, then it must be the work of an artist. It must be the work of human effort somehow, some way. And if that's the case, well, then we should find some evidence of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, stain. We should find something that was used by some alleged artist or forger to come up with this image. And yet, probably the most significant conclusion of the Shroud project is that there is no visible trace of any of these artistic substances on the cloth, leading to these scientists to conclude that the image is just not the result of an artist, period. So now they're not going to tell you, science is not going to tell you that, oh, this is the image of Jesus. They can't do that. They can tell you what it's not, and then you can decide what it is. And it's and so now we have this mystery deepened even further by the fact that you have this exceedingly faint image. Now let me just explain something also that's really important into understanding the nature of the shroud image. The first thing you see when you look at the shroud is a whole pattern of burns and patches. And I have a little something here. I'll try to hold this up to the if you can see that. Reduce my thing here so I can. So you're seeing the image of a man here, and the first thing you see are these parallel lines, which are nothing more than burns and patches and scorch marks from a fire in 1532. It was kept in a silver box, top of the box melted, and a glob of molten or melted silver fell down onto a corner. And the way that the shroud was, it was folded in 16 layers, so now you get 16 burns. And so it was was later patched up. So that's the first thing you see. You see these parallel lines of burns and patches and scorch marks. But then you also see a pattern of water stains where the fire was presumably doused or put out. And then you also see a pattern of blood stains, right? So now if you took that cloth and you flipped it over, you would see the burns, the water stains, the blood stains. But the one thing you would not see is the image of the man. The image of the man is a purely superficial phenomenon affecting only the top 1 to 2 microfibers. Now, bear in mind that each individual thread is made up of about 200 microfibers. So that means that this image resides on about 1% of a single thread wherever the image is visible. So it's exceedingly superficial. So it does not penetrate the cloth as does the water stains, the blood, and the burns. Now and this is true wherever you look at it, whether anywhere on the frontal image, anywhere on the dorsal image. It makes no difference of where you look at it. It has the same image density. Now you would think that it would require a piece of technology to accomplish that. So then now we have this inexplicably superficial image, but then you have this whole pattern of blood stains. Now, in terms of the wounds, a lot of people ask, well, how do you know it's Jesus? Thousands of people were crucified. Well, now we got to look at the gospel account and look at what happened specifically to Jesus. And, the crown of thorns was a singular mockery for the man who claimed to be king of the Jews, right? So not everyone received the crown of thorns as a routine of crucifixion. And then you have a man who's massively scourged, whip marks all over the body. why was Jesus scourged so badly? Because Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, didn't want to kill him. And the first thing he did, he sent him to King Herod, and Herod sent him back. And then he tried to trade Barabbas, and that didn't work. And so finally he has him scourged to within an inch of his life, hoping that when this bloodied hulk of a man came walking back into the courtyard, that maybe the crowds would say, okay, that's enough. You don't have to kill him. But that's not what happened, is it? In spite of being brutally scourged, they still wanted him dead. You see, usually you were scourged and released as a form of punishment, or you were crucified to be executed. Rarely would you be massively scourged and crucified, because the Romans were a brutal bunch. When they crucified someone, they expected you to stay alive on the cross all day long as your life slowly ebbs away. And in the case of Jesus, it lasted 6 hours. But in the case of the two thieves, when they came to Jesus, they noticed he was already dead. Therefore, they didn't break it. They didn't break his legs. But they broke the legs of the first thief and those of the other. Now, they would break the legs to speed the process of asphyxia, which is the inability to breathe. And because apparently when someone who's crucified has to kind of stand up and down on his nail-pierced feet to release the pressure from his chest so he could kind of gasp in and gasp out. But you can't stand on broken legs, die from asphyxia. But when they came to Jesus, they noticed he was already dead. Therefore, they did not break his legs. Instead, what did they do? They stabbed him in the side with a spear to make sure he was dead. And so in John's gospel says outflowed blood and water. Well, certainly blood, probably not water, probably the separation of blood and blood serum, which looks like water, but that indicates that it is a post-mortem blood wound, because that separation of blood and blood serum that we can see in this blood stain only occurs when the heart is no longer beating and the blood is no longer circulating. So this is a post-mortem, an after-death wound, which would be consistent with the time frame for when Jesus was also stabbed in the side. And then you have this last thing, is the fact that you have Jesus. He clearly died a criminal's death, was crucified in between two thieves, and yet he's wrapped in a rich man's shroud, because the shroud is a very expensive linen. It's made of a 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave, doable in first century, yet expensive, therefore rare. It probably satisfies the Jewish requirement of being fine twisted linen, which would be suitable for a high priest about to enter the Holy of Holies. And so now you have a man who clearly died a criminal's death and wrapped in one of the most expensive burial shrouds that could be purchased at the time. That flat out doesn't happen. So now you have all these uniquenesses to what happened to Jesus. So there's no mistaken identity. So in other words, so if the shroud is indeed the image of a real human being who died from these wounds, there's only one candidate, and his name is Jesus.
But in the sixth station of the cross, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Is that comparable? Or let's talk about that. Is that cloth that Veronica used, is that still somewhere?
Veronica's cloth is probably a lovely story. Was there a woman who wiped his face along the road on the Via della Rosa? Probably. I'm sure there was. Was an image, miraculously appear on the cloth? Probably not. There's no reference to the Veronica cloth prior to the 12th century. But let me tell you what Veronica's cloth probably is. That when the shroud was removed from Jerusalem pretty quick, because the Romans and the Jews both had a vested interest in destroying it. Probably, historically, we believe, brought to ancient Edessa, which today would be in southern Turkey. And it was at the time was part of ancient Syria, and it was its own separate city-state and outside the reaches of the Roman Empire at that time. And so this cloth was about 400 miles north of Jerusalem, and they would have brought this cloth to Edessa, and there's a whole legend about how King Abgar V, the king of the city-state of Edessa, was healed of leprosy upon beholding a mysterious cloth with a mysterious image of Jesus on it, and which we think is the shroud folded up and presented to the king, because it was for the Jews, the shroud would have been a conundrum because it was unclean. It wrapped a corpse. It's covered with blood, so they wouldn't have known what to do with it. And you're certainly not going to throw it away. And so I think the answer was just give it to the Gentiles and let them figure it out. And so this cloth that arrived in Edessa circa 1st century was eventually hidden away inside of a wall for safekeeping because the persecution was starting to really pick up. And it was probably folded and rolled and placed into a clay pot, much like you would think of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it was literally forgotten about for centuries. And it was rediscovered in the early 6th century after a flood. And in the rebuilding of the wall, they rediscover this mysterious cloth with a mysterious image on it. Well, at this point, in the early 6th century, we're 200 years past Constantine. It's safe to be a Christian. And this thing, it becomes known as the true likeness of Christ, not made by human hands. Now, true likeness is oftentimes can be translated into the Latin as vera icon, Veronica. So this was the true likeness, and later on turned into a name based on the two Latin words vera icon, true likeness. That's just a pretty prominent theory among us Shroudies. So the cloth that purports to be the Veronica cloth, which I guess is in the Vatican, has never really been analyzed or observed. I've heard descriptions that it's more likely described as just kind of a smudge. So I don't go into anything else other than the shroud. Really, is because nothing else. You see, the shroud has been analyzed so completely. The work of the scientists was published in 24 different peer-reviewed journal articles. Nothing else rises to that level. So so go ahead. What's your next question?
Yeah, I want to know where your love for the Shroud of Turin came from. Like, where did that start, or what got you interested in it?
Well, it's probably more of the fact that when I learned about the shroud, I thought of it. You see, I don't need the shroud for my faith. I just don't. I think the shroud is very important, and it is an important gospel in my view. I think it's a gospel written on linen. It's speaks every language, has no need to be translated, speaks to every level. A 5-year-old can look at it, who can't even read, can know it's Jesus. A college student like yourself can get all caught up in the science and stuff that's related to it. But then the academic, the intellectual can take it as deep as they want to go into how it fits with apologetics and theology and things like this. So from my standpoint, I got involved in the shroud because I had so many unbelieving friends. I really saw the shroud as perhaps a vehicle to reach some of these non-believers. And so that's kind of been my focus, which is to explore this incredible relic artifact from the standpoint of, can it be used, to reach an unbelieving world? And that's what I've been doing.
And you're the founder of the Shroud Encounter, but is that the same thing as the Shroud of Turin Education Project? Because I saw both on your website.
Yeah, they're both. The Shroud of Turin Education Project Inc. is my corporation name, and it's I brand everything Shroud Encounter. Okay. So later today I'll be going to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and be putting on 3 Shroud Encounters, and so that's how I brand everything. My website's called shroudencounter.com. You can find me on Facebook, Shroud Encounter, Instagram, Shroud Encounter, YouTube, Shroud Encounter. So you get the idea.
Yeah. And I want to know too, does the shroud travel or does it stay in one place? Is it just in Turin?
The shroud does not travel. It's been in Turin. The only time, to my knowledge, that it left Turin since 1578 was during the 7 years of World War II,
Oh,
when
interesting.
it was removed from Turin and brought to a monastery south of Rome, Montevigen, a Benedictine monastery, and was hidden inside the choir altar because at this point in time, the shroud was owned by the King of Italy. It was feared that Hitler, the Fuhrer, was
Mm.
interested in the shroud. Just only a couple months prior to the beginning of World War II, Hitler had invaded Austria, and the first thing he did was to go to the Hofburg Museum and steal the spear of Longinus, which was the alleged spear that stabbed Jesus in the side. Longinus was allegedly the name of the centurion who stabbed him, and so Hitler had an obsession with certain relics and certain things. He was trying to find the Holy Grail, and he certainly would have got his hands on the shroud if he could, and that's why it was hidden. So it was 7 years, but that's the only time it's ever been taken out of Turin.
Yeah, because I was at the Eucharistic Revival in 2024, so they must have just had like a display, or not like the actual Shroud of Turin, but they must have had some pictures or something of it because it was a long line. There was so many people and so many things to do in Indianapolis that week, but they must have had pictures of it or something else because it couldn't have actually been the Shroud of Turin. But
No,
the lines were long for that.
no, there are several photographic replicas of the
Okay.
shroud. I mean, I have one myself,
Mm.
and it's and they're excellent. They are museum quality, and so you'd be hard pressed to know the difference between the real one versus the photo replica, unless you just got right up close to it and could see the actual
Yeah.
weave of the cloth. Because on the replica, it's a photograph, so it's going to be printed onto cotton canvas
Mhm.
or some other cloth. So if you get close up, you'll see the difference. But if you're standing 10 feet away from it, you wouldn't know.
So would that still be a relic too in quotes? Like could I touch my religious item to that? And then that would be like a third class relic, right?
To the replica,
Because that's
only if the replica itself had been touched to the
okay.
shroud.
Okay.
And there are actually, believe it or not, there are 52 of those around the world that were painted copies of the shroud. They're actually quite horrible. They were made from anywhere from the 16, 17, 1800s, and they were given special permission to be touched to the shroud itself. And this was documented by the Bishop of Turin to certify that this occurred. But none of the replicas floating around now, the photographic
Mm.
replicas,
Okay.
are have been touched to the shroud, as far as I know. However, that doesn't mean that they don't have, some kind of I don't know what the word is, anointing or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Does one specific person own the Shroud? Is it just that? Is it a church? Is it in a church in Turin?
It is kept in the Cathedral of Saint John the Baptist. Has
Mm.
been there. That church was completed in 1694 to be a permanent home for the shroud. The Ever since 1983, the shroud has been owned by the current living pope.
Mm.
Prior to 83, it was owned by the various kings of Italy. Ever since they purchased it in 1453 for the price of two castles. So in more recent history, let's say in the past 500 or 600 years, it's been it was owned by the king, with the church acting as the custodian of the shroud. So anytime someone with the church wanted to have an exhibition, they'd have to get permission from the king.
Mm.
And then likewise, if the king wanted to do something, he'd have to coordinate it with
The
the
church.
church. So
Why would the king own it? Wouldn't it be the church? Shouldn't it be the Pope or something? Like a Catholic?
well, it was Margaret de Charny, who is the great granddaughter of Geoffrey de Charnay, who was the French knight who had the possession of the shroud in 1356. There's a
Mhm.
long history of how he got it, but then he passed it on to his children, and then Margaret de Charnay, I think both of her husbands died. She didn't have any kids. She had no one to pass the shroud on to. And at that point, she was concerned about the well-being of this holy relic.
Yeah.
So she wanted to make sure that it was with a family that had means to protect it, to display it, to preserve it, and that was the Savoy family. And the Savoy family was very interested in obtaining the shroud from her, so it was a mutual agreeable deal, and they provided her as compensation for the relic the revenue derived from two castles, which I presume is a pretty good amount of money, so that happened in 1453, and so it remained in possession of the various kings of Italy until 1983, when the last king of Italy, he was exiled. He was kicked out of the country after World War II because Italy became a republic at that point. It was no longer a monarchy. And so he went to live in Portugal in exile, but he allowed the shroud to remain in Turin and allowed the church to maintain the custody of it. But then in '83 he was dying, and at that point, and he had he had one son, and when that son got married in Las Vegas and didn't tell either of the parents what he was doing, he said, "Well, there's no way I can give this to my son. God only knows what he'll do with it." And so at that point, he willed it to the current living pope.
Interesting. Have you been to see the real Shroud? Have you been to Turin, Italy and seen it?
I have. It's a lovely city, and I've been there three times and saw it in '98 and 2000 and 2010. Last time I was on exhibit was 15. I did not go. I didn't, three times is enough. The next time it'll be on exhibit, they say, rumor only, probably 2033.
Mhm.
So still going to be a few years yet before it's
Yeah.
on public exhibition.
It's got to be a beautiful church too, right? All the churches in Italy are gorgeous.
Oh yeah, this is very, very, very beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna wrap it up. It's been almost 40 minutes. That flew by, but you wrote multiple books. Tell us about those books.
Well, I've written three books, and I'll show them to you. The first one is called Shroud Encounter: Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved
Right.
Mystery. And then, hold on, I get rid of this, and you can see it here. And then it's up on Amazon. Then the second book I wrote last year called Understanding the Shroud of Turin, a short book, full color images.
Oh, nice.
You can read this in about an hour. And then the last one I just came out with a couple months ago called Beneath the Surface, a closer look at the Shroud of Turin. And this goes into assuming the shroud is authentic, which I certainly believe it is, then how does it relate to theology and prophecy and scripture and in Christian apologetics? And you'll be surprised just how well it does fit. Yeah.
Well, one more time, where can our listeners connect with you on your social
You
media?
connect with me at shroudencounter.com, and my contact info is there. If someone wants to jot me an email or something, you can find it there on my website. And it's happy to chat. And if someone wants to, go all around the country doing these shroud encounters. It's a
Mhm.
90-minute presentation, 200 images on the big screen, all animated images. Everything moves fast, and it's exceedingly comprehensive, and it'll pretty much blow your mind. And it's
Mhm.
so yeah.
I
So
forgot, you're coming to Illinois, right? Clarendon Hills. Have you already done
I
that?
I
I
am
forgot.
that is coming up. I think it's Notre Dame
Yeah.
Catholic Church. I think it's a Thursday, maybe the 17th
Oh, okay.
of April, and I think it's at 5:30. So if someone wants
Awesome.
to go,
Yeah.
then yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for telling us a little bit about the Shroud of Turin. Very with Easter coming up and everything too. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your
Oh,
time.
my pleasure. God bless you.
Busy man. God bless you too.